Welcome to The Explainer. In this set of slides, we're going to dig into something that's, well, it's a huge point of confusion for a lot of people. What's the difference between Islam, the faith, and Islamism, the political ideology? So you hear these terms, Islam and Islamism, and honestly, they get used interchangeably all the time. But here's the thing. Understanding the difference between them is absolutely crucial if you want to make sense of, well, modern politics and a faith that spans the entire globe. So let's break it down. To really get to the bottom of this, we're going to start with a pretty simple analogy, and it's from a field you might not expect. We're talking about science. It's actually the perfect tool for understanding what's going on here. Okay, so let's jump right into this analogy. Science versus scientism. So on the one hand, you've got science, right? It's all about discovery, asking questions, finding things out. But then, on the other hand, you have scientism, and that's something different. It's an ideology that says science is the only way to know anything. It piles this huge political and philosophical weight on science that, frankly, science itself was never meant to carry. And you see that little suffix, ism? That's the real key here. Nowadays, when you stick ism on the end of a word, it often means you're shifting from just an idea or an activity to a really rigid, our way or the highway kind of ideology. Okay, let's make this even more concrete. I want you to picture a kindergarten playground. So think about a normal playtime. A kid can play with blocks, and let's just say blocks represent science for this example. But they can also play with dolls, draw with crayons, read books, or hey, even take a nap. It's all good, right? They're all perfectly fine things to do during playtime. But now, imagine playtime under scientism. All of a sudden, playing with blocks is the only thing you're allowed to do. It's mandatory. All the other toys, forbidden. The crayons, the dolls, gone. The blocks aren't just toys anymore. They've become this symbol of the one and only right way to play. And here's the crucial point. Science is amazing and useful all by itself. It doesn't need scientism to work. In fact, scientism often messes things up by forcing a bunch of political rules onto science, rules that have nothing to do with science itself. Okay, you with me so far? Good. Now let's take this whole ism framework and apply it back to our main topic. So the steps are pretty simple, right? We understood science as a tradition. We understood scientism as this exclusionary ideology. Now, let's do the exact same thing with Islam and Islamism. And this brings us right to the heart of it. Islamism is not the same as the faith of Islam. It's a modern political ideology. And probably the best way to think about it is as a kind of Islamic nationalism. So check this out. This is a really key difference. You know how many religions have this idea of salvific exclusivity? Basically the belief that their religion is the one true path to salvation in the afterlife? Well, what Islamism does is it takes that theological idea about the next world and twists it into a political rule for this world. It demands that only one religious identity is okay in the political sphere, right here, right now. Now, to really get why we're calling Islamism a form of nationalism, we have to talk a little bit about what nationalism even is. Because here's a fun fact. Nationalism, the way we think of it, is actually pretty new. It didn't really get going until things like the American and French revolutions. And that's what gave us the idea of the nation state, this idea that a state should be for one specific group of people. And that idea, well, it pretty much took over the world. And the contrast here is just stark. For centuries, you had these big pre-modern Islamic empires. They were run by dynasties, and they ruled over all sorts of different people. Minorities were generally integrated into the system. You had things like the jizya tax for non-Muslims, for example. What mattered was whether you were loyal to the ruler, not what your specific identity was. But modern Islamist ideology, it's totally different. It's nationalist. It looks at all that diversity and sees it as a problem that needs to be fixed, usually by forcing people out or putting them down. So the takeaway is huge. Islamism is not some ancient, continuous tradition. Nope, it's a modern political movement, and its goals are completely different from, and even alien to, most of Islamic political history. Now here's where things get really, really ironic. This confusion between Islam and Islamism, it actually helps out two groups that you'd think would be bitter enemies. So what's the one belief that brings them together? It's this. Both the Islamists themselves and some of their loudest anti-Islam critics make the exact same argument. They both say that this political ideology, Islamism, is the one and only true Islam. But in reality, look at this. Islamists make up a tiny, tiny fraction of the world's Muslims. We're talking less than 1%. But both of these groups completely focus on that one tiny slice and insist that it represents the whole pie, completely ignoring the other 99+% of Muslims who are not Islamists. It's pretty wild, right? They end up in this symbiotic relationship that just reinforces both of their worldviews. The critics point at the Islamists and say, "See, we were right." And the Islamists use that exact same attention to claim that they speak for everybody. And in the middle of all this noise, the actual diverse reality of the faith and its long history just gets completely lost. Okay, so after all that, what are the big things you should walk away with? Okay, let's just run through the key distinctions one more time so they really stick. First, you have Islam. That's a faith tradition that's been around for 1400 years. Then you have Islamism. That's a modern political ideology that only really popped up in the 20th century. Historically, Islamic politics was often based on dynastic rule and, well, a practical tolerance for different groups. Islamist politics, on the other hand, is all about modern nationalism and exclusion. And this is a big one. For Muslims, the Quran is a holy book. But for Islamists, they often reinterpret the Quran as if it were a political founding document, like a constitution. And that leaves us with one last really important question to think about. Getting this distinction right isn't just some academic game, you know? It has very real consequences in the world. So you have to ask yourself, when we fail to see the difference, or when someone deliberately blurs that line, who actually benefits from all that confusion?